All right, we're here with Seth Hanes, a great friend of mine who's just put out Break Into the Scene, which is a book that hit #1 in music business within what was it, just a couple days of being out, Seth?
A couple of hours, actually.
Couple of hours. Holy cow. And I had Seth on my podcast, Contrabase Conversations, and I was not the only podcast Seth appeared on. He actually appeared on, how many podcasts was it total?
Total, it was 10.
Wow. Yeah. And I thought
Wow, indeed.
I thought it'd be great to sit down with Seth just for a few minutes because he's one of the first people I've seen that's actually tapped into this podcasting community. I don't know whether you call it art music podcasting or classical music podcasting or whatever you want to call it, but Seth really leveraged that community with his book launch. And can you just talk through that, like why maybe you thought podcasting would be a good thing to target and how you did it?
Yeah, sure. So there's I should preface everything I'm going to say that this is not a unique idea to me. I should totally say that, I got a lot of messages from people that was, like someone used the word like innovative approach. I was like, that's not really true. I mean, it's any form of marketing is you're essentially trying to figure out where is my audience and how can I reach the most amount of those people at the highest leverage point and the lowest investment, right? So like you want the marketing to not cost you a lot of money, but you want to reach a lot of people, right? Mm-hmm. And so podcasting is not terribly new, but it's still a very young medium, right? I mean, it's been around for 10 years, give or take it, in various, not always has been as accessible as it is now. Mm-hmm. But so I saw a lot of authors that I follow. I've been following like book marketing strategies for several years now, kind of in preparation for knowing I was eventually going to do my own project. And it's something I'm interested in doing for other people. So I wanted to learn as much as I could. And one thing that I've seen with every single huge successful launch is doing a podcast tour. And mm-hmm. part of the really big appeal for that is that it's relatively new in the space of music.
Yeah.
It's not like the platform itself isn't terribly new, but it's new and unique in the space of like classical music because this wouldn't have been possible a year ago.
Right.
At all. Like none. So because at the time Andrew Hitz it's been going a little while now, but let's say 2 years ago, this would not have been, it would have been possible, but it would not have been nearly as effective because there just weren't nearly as many platforms out there. Because right now, I mean, I reached out to a bunch of different podcasts in various ways, and I ended up getting 10 interviews. And some of those were smaller podcasts, some of them were bigger, some of them were medium sized. But it was essentially a very simple way for me to share the message of my book, Break Into the Scene, with a wider audience, and it's less work. For me, it's like I'm an individual guy. I'm sitting here in my apartment in South Philly with the dog asleep on the couch back here. This is mission control over here, right? I mean, I'm an individual guy. I wrote, I marketed, I edited, or I managed the editing process with an editor. I did it all myself. So I had to find various outlets where I could spread the word without it being a huge investment of time, which it was. I mean, I spent easily 12 hours at minimum, probably closer to 15 to 20 when it was all said and done, just doing the recording process and coordinating the interviews and everything. But then in addition to that, I have my own site that I've been building up. I did guest posting on various blogs and things, but that was the initial reasoning, is because it's such a relatively new platform to this space, the space of music. So it kind of lended itself well to, what I was interested in doing, which was spreading the word about my book.
Yeah.
So that was why I initially made such a big investment in the podcasting space for my book launch.
Well, and then so you're also doing some guest posting on other sites, and
Mm-hmm.
I do guest posting too. But why? We were just talking before I turn on the recorder here. Why some of the advantages that maybe having a podcast versus a guest post would like what kind of advantage that would have long term? Because you go to a site and the post kind of gets buried in all the
Yeah,
activity of the
absolutely.
site. Like that was part of your strategy too, right?
Yeah, absolutely, 100%. So the goal here, is to not just like obviously when the book launches, you want to make a big hoopla, big, you want it to be a big announcement, you want it to be a big splash. So I was extremely meticulous with making sure that like everything was going to kind of happen within. I wanted there to be this huge buzz around the book when it came out, which I felt like I was relatively successful with. I was very pleased with it. I mean, anybody that's like friends with anyone I know probably saw this in 5 different places over the course of a week. But yeah, so but when you do guest posts on blogs and things, that has a very I don't want to say it has a short term like lifespan, but relatively speaking, it just doesn't, the content just doesn't lend itself to having this kind of like longer tail like podcasts do, because and I don't have any like research statistics behind this. I just know how I interact with the platform. So for me, I pull out my phone wherever it is over here, and I find a new podcast I like let's say, I'm a bass player here in Philadelphia. Maybe I'm studying with some of the guys in the orchestra. I'm starting out school and I'm just getting into this world of, the professional bass player community. And, let's say I stumble across your podcast, Jason, the Contrabass Conversations. If I enjoy it, like, you better believe I'm going to go back and like find other interviews that are interesting on that show, because it's a very low investment of time and energy for the user, because it's audio. They can listen to it while they're walking to class. I mean, I get through at least 2 hours of an audio book or podcasts every single day.
Yeah.
But between, I'm a huge reader. I'm a huge podcast listener. I listen while I walk the dog. I listen while I'm in Philadelphia. I listen while I walk downtown. I walk everywhere when I'm doing the dishes, when I'm laying in bed, whatever it is. So, it's a way to kind of like engage with an audience in a way that requires like less of an investment. We live in so much of like marketing these days, and it's always been about this, but it's all about attention, right? I mean, it's all about how can you get the attention of the audience that you want to reach. And so like, I know that my book is a useful resource, and it's a product that will add a lot of value to the people that I want to reach, musicians who are trying to build their careers up, whether that's getting started or expanding it. So podcast versus guest posting is like, guest posts, they go out once, they get shared around. Some of the posts got a lot of shares. I mean, I saw some that got up to 70 or 80 shares in the first week, which is awesome. But that's going to, unless the person managing that kind of like, that gatekeeper, that's like their content, unless they're actively promoting all of their content over a long period of time, using a tool like Edgar is a tool like this, for example, where you can recycle old content and it's still fresh, so you can share something from a year ago. But podcasts, it just has this, it's just, the platform is so different than like reading, because that's such like an actively engaged. You can't do anything else while you're reading like a blog post or an article on Medium or whatever it is. However, podcasts I can listen to while I'm walking the dog, while I'm, I'm commuting, driving in the car, I'm going out to a gig, going out to teach, or going to work, whatever it is. So that was one of the big draws of why I wanted to, I invested a good amount of time, energy, and resources into the podcasts. And kind of one other small thing that I really wanted to hit on is the fact that if someone listens to, say, your podcast, Jason, but they're also interested in like entrepreneurship or maybe the other areas of the music world, there are different music podcasts out there that if they listen to one, they probably listen to at least one of the other ones, right?
Right.
So so like, let's say someone is like interested in starting their own thing and they're a bass player. They're probably listening to your podcast, but they're also probably listening to, say, Andrew Hitt's Toronto Musician, for example.
Right.
So I actually got a Twitter message the other day from someone that was like, he sent me a message and he was like, hey man, I just wanted to say I used the script in your book, one of the strategies, and I spent like 20 minutes last Saturday after I got the book. Like I read it on my Kindle, and I actually like copied and pasted the script from like your site, and I sent out a few emails and I started reaching out to people, and I got a gig the next day. Like, that's amazing. This guy spent like $2 on a Kindle book and made $200. So of course I'm like, where did you hear about it? Like, because as the marketer, I want to know, like, how did you hear about it? Like, because what worked, what didn't, right? And he was like, well, it's funny. Your name completely took over my podcast feed that week because I was on like every music podcast that I could be. So like he probably opened his podcast feed and saw like Seth Hanes, which, that's great awareness for me. So, so people that have no idea who I am, who've never heard of me, all of a sudden there's this huge social proof in their mind of like, who is this guy and why is he on every single podcast?
Yeah. No, I certainly had that experience myself because I subscribed to all of those podcasts you're talking about. And it's cool. Like you were describing, the podcast audience, they tend to be loyalists. So it's like a good way to like really connect with those true believers of whatever that topic is that podcast is about.
Absolutely.
And that low investment, but the evergreen quality of the podcast content. Like you're saying, you find a podcast and you start to look through and see what else they put out. And so one of these interviews that you did, and again, I don't have research to back this up either, but my sense, based on the way I interact with it, is I'm much more likely to find a podcast episode that was put out even like 2, 3, 4 years ago than I am to find a blog post that was. Just
absolutely.
Based on how
because when you're on the phone, let's say you're on the train, let's say you're taking a trolley around SF out there, and you're getting to the end of a podcast and you still have half an hour of a commute. Like, you can just easily swipe down through it and see if something jumps out at you. I mean, if you're on a phone, I mean, like, it's just like the medium is just so there's more of a like mental barrier for like reading, say, like blog posts. I mean, there's still a tremendously powerful. I mean, I did 8 or 9. I think when it was all said and done, I wrote another 12,000 words on blog posts. That's half the book, like, so I mean, they both have their pluses and minuses, but yeah, I mean, just that kind of evergreen quality is really, it's a really powerful kind of, it's a very potent like medicine for like, reaching people.
Yeah.